Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, welcoming you back to another Principal Matters episode. Jen, this is going to be Principal Matters podcast episode 495. 495. Can you believe that? We're recording this at the beginning of April, and Leanne Nicol, who, I'm not sure what season of the year it is over there, but she's on the other side. She's in Australia serving in a wonderful school, and I cannot wait to introduce listeners to that conversation. But before we do, the question of the week is supported by Summer Pop's Math Workbooks. Principals, when students practice math over the summer, math scores go up. What is your summer math plan this year? A great way to start is by ordering free summer workbook samples at summerpopsworkbooks.com. All right, Jen, here's the question.
Okay, I'm ready.
I'm an AP, and I've been invited to apply for a principal position. What should I keep in mind as I step into a series of upcoming interviews? And just because I know the context of this person's looking at like several panels to go through before they would be able to be named in this position. So, we have 5 minutes, but I'm sure you have a book you could probably share on this topic.
Right. Well, first of all, congratulations to this listener and any
Yeah.
listener who's been in this position because clearly you've impressed someone and someone believes that you can make that transition from AP to principal. And so just when I think about the interviews, I think about that really important balance you need to find between being the expert that you are, having seen into the back of the kitchen, so to speak, as the AP, yet also the humility to recognize that you've never yet sat in that seat. You've never actually been the principal. And so both confident and both and humble at the same time. And I
Yeah.
think that's doable. I think it's through stories and very tangible examples where you have worked through a problem like a principal would.
That's so good, Jen. Um, So the flip side of both courageous, because you're showing up as an expert who can demonstrate that you know what you're doing and you can envision what that work is going to look like at this next level. But then the humility, I would add the word curiosity to also be exploring what I don't know, because you're also stepping into a situation that you don't know yet because you've never served in that role. And I think that mixture is so important because if I'm on the other side of you, I'm gonna be watching, like, this is the version of the person I might be working with or hiring or bringing into the community, and I wanna see them communicate with confidence. I wanna see them be able to command a room in a sense, but also I wanna see them curious enough, collaborative enough, inquisitive enough to wanna know more so that they're making an informed decision. Um, that's really good, Jen. You and I have talked about this in other settings too. This, difficulty that people face when the panels are looking for, like, the perfect person or the superhuman or I think I've said to you in other cases, like, either you have to be a superhero or Jesus to get this position. And so how do you what would you say to that person too that's stepping into these unrealistic expectations people have about leaders?
Well, yeah, you and I just had a text exchange about this a couple weeks ago. I was talking about a colleague you and I both know, and I said, the good Lord himself could come on down and run this school and they ain't going to be happy. And so I think what I would say to anyone interviewing is, first of all, good for you. It takes courage to believe in yourself enough to go in there and do it. And I also would encourage anyone else who's running an interview panel or who's running an interview process to make sure that the committees that you have doing this work are explicitly told. These are human beings with families and jobs and mortgages to pay, and they want to work here. And so let's not be overly critical or unkind or ridiculous in our expectations because we do want a human being running this place. We don't want a robot and we don't want perfection. So, maybe just level set that from the beginning because there's nobody perfect out there.
No, there's not. So, um, I know that Jen and I have spoken to this question probably a couple of times already in the last few episodes, and that's because it's that time of the year, and a lot of people are really working hard on those transitions. So if you have questions and you're like, "I wanna go deeper," or "Could I jump in a room with you or Jen and just ask you questions, reach out. You can always reach me at will@williambparker.com. And Jen, how can they find you?
Yep, they can find me at jenschwanke.com.
All right. Well, friends, I know you're going to love this conversation with a veteran leader, Leanne Nicol. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters, and we'll see you next week. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. IXL is research proven to benefit all student populations, including English language learners and special education classrooms. IXL is an all-inclusive online learning and teaching solution for K-12 that accelerates achievement, saves teachers time, and more. This one platform helps you accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically differentiates learning to help them master concepts at their own pace. Teachers get real-time insights into how students are performing so they can provide timely support. What I love about IXL are the personalized SAT and ACT study plans. Students just need to enter the most recent test score, and IXL automatically generates a custom list of skills they should work on to improve their scores. Discover what IXL can do for your school. Visit ixl.com/PM today.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, back with another episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week I'm talking to my special guest, Leanne Nicol. Leanne Nicol is a Sydney educator, experienced principal, and certified master coach who supports education leaders in culture, strategy, and well-being. She has led in Catholic primary schools and worked with Sydney Catholic schools on review and improvement processes. And as the founder of Fierce Hearts, she helps leaders align purpose and practice to create flourishing school communities. She's also the author of the new book, The Fierce Hearted Leader: Living, Learning, and Leading with Love, a guide to leading from the inside out. Leanne Nicol, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners
Thank,
something else they may be surprised to know about you?
thank you, Will. That's a very comprehensive introduction, and I appreciate that very much. A few other little things. I guess I've worked both in Australia across a number of different educational systems and in different states, and also internationally. I think for me, that what I really value about my career is that I have length, breadth, and depth of experience. And, 44 years ago, when I went into this amazing profession, I didn't actually set out to do that. I think I can lean into what I think is the experience of a lot of women, particularly of my generation, that we weren't very targeted and planned and intentional about our career. I certainly wasn't for the first 20 years, that it just sort of happened to me rather than me having a say in it. But I also think that that was sort of my God, my higher power looking after me, and as they always have. So then it has taken me in some extraordinary journeys and amazing directions, for which I'm really grateful. Something that you might not know about me is, well, I'm sure you don't. I have 3 dogs. That's a lot of dogs. We live in a townhouse. Um, and just a quirky little story. My husband, who is an amazing person he's retired and he is the house husband and looks after everything. We sent him shopping to buy 2 little Maltese Terriers, and there were 3 in the litter, and he came home with all 3. So we have rather a crazy household. We have usually more dogs than people. And at the moment, my daughter is living with us, and she also has a dog. So, there's a bit of crazy dog lady in me as well.
I'm so glad to know that. And if any of them want to jump into the show, we're not going to edit them out. You'll
Okay.
probably hear my dog Ivy, who likes to jump in, and sometimes my cat Nitro comes running across the screen. So we're also a pet family. I'm so glad
Yeah.
to know that. Most of my listeners are U.S. based, although
Yes.
I have listeners in Australia,
You
and
do.
I believe you and I believe you actually led a school with Anne Marie Ma as one of your teachers before. She's been a guest on this show before. And so what was the connection there?
So I employed Anne Marie as a teacher. I was in my first principalship, so some 26 years ago, I think now. And she was a very enthusiastic and type A personality and an excellent teacher. And during her time there, she actually applied for one of the temporary leadership positions that had become available. And so that was her first entree into school leadership. And it was a delight to have her and to be part of her journey. Anne Marie and I are still in contact at the moment. She features in my book. She is what I call a fierce-hearted leader, and I don't want to. I know that she very publicly says that I am her favourite principal that she ever worked with,
Mhm.
and I feel really humbled by that. Because she that was 26 years ago, and she's gone on to work for many principals since and a few beforehand. So I feel very honored.
I had a friend today that posted on social media, "There's not a better compliment than when a student says you were their favorite teacher." And I feel the same way about anyone that we've been able to serve alongside with. And so for Anne Marie to say that you've been her favorite principal, that's an amazing encouragement. I want listeners to know that you and I have connected outside of this recording before. We're actually recording this several months before your book is going to come out. So by the time this releases, it's very possible that your book will have been released. Tell us the story a little bit about the fierce hearted leader, which is what we're going to be talking about today, and what motivated you to write that book before we start jumping into some of the content.
Sure. I I've worked in leadership for probably 40 of my 44 years it, as a middle leader and emerging leader. And I've had many years as a senior leader, both at school and at system level. And it's a, I describe being a school principal as like the best gig in the whole world. It brings such joy to my soul, and it makes my heart sing. And it is an amazing job. At the same time, it's a really challenging role sometimes, and really, really challenging. And I think that breaks my heart when I work with really good people with all the right motivations, and I can see them really struggling in the role, uh, as struggling at a human level, at a really human level, because of some of the things that are so deeply human that they're dealing with. I want to be an advocate for school leaders and for the amazing work they do. Well, one of the things that the world knows about coming out of COVID is the challenges that we have with our students and some of the mental health issues that we see played out every day in our schools and in our society. And hats off to everybody who's doing their best to support those kids and to manage them. Here in Australia, and I know it's the same in the UK and New Zealand and in the US, our teachers also post-COVID are struggling, and we're losing some people to our profession, our great profession. I have a hypothesis that sometimes we're losing them because their hearts are broken and their spirits are broken. And the data in terms of our leaders' well-being is off the scale more concerning than either of those groups of the children or the teachers. But it is our leaders who are holding it all together at the school level. But this is a crisis. If we don't take notice of this with our leaders, we know that there's not a pipeline of leaders coming through, but they're going to leave because their hearts and spirits are broken, or they just they might not even be with us, or they won't be happy in their relationships. And the data is beyond disturbing. It's it's quite it's just a crisis waiting to just unfold. So I want to speak into that space. And I think that, well, not I think, the Fierce Hearted Leader, the book, is about a deep call to remembering. It's more than just going, oh yeah, I came into this because I love the job. I mean, it's a deeper call to remembering, because for me, it's the book came out of this passion to want to speak into this space and to advocate for people.
Let me jump in for just a moment because, Leanne, you've said something that you've you've worded that in a way I've not heard someone else say that before. Because um, I talk to a lot of leaders who, like you, believe they've never done anything that they think is more meaningful than the work that they're doing, and at the same time, they can't think of anything they've ever done that's more challenging than what they're doing. But
Sure.
the idea that people who are in caring professions feel very deeply the challenges that they're dealing with when it comes to students or families or fellow staff members or whatever, that I call leaders the buffer of all the pain that's coming towards schools. And so for you to put those into the words of how do we manage the brokenheartedness of leaders who are often still committed, but they're hurting while committed. And so your commitment to frame leadership as both fierce, but also hearted or strong and compassionate, I
That's
just
right.
think is so key. Um, so you write a lot in this book about that, and I'm going to quote you, that we lead who we are. So, what are some ways that leaders that you're finding where leaders can reconnect with their purpose and their identity and confront this burnout that is also really real at the same time too?
Yeah. Um, Will, I'll just correct you a little if you don't mind. We
Thank you.
Lead Who We Are is based on Parker Palmer, so I wouldn't want to. He's, as we probably all appreciate, a very, very established grandfather, if you like, of writing in educational space. So he actually has a book that we teach who we are, The Courage to Teach, and he says we teach who we are. So I've tweaked it and said we lead who we are, because I don't think that's a big stretch. I don't think I'm doing him a disservice. So just to fix that up. Um, so your question, and I really like how you've picked up on that strength and that gentleness. And what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? And I think you've just nudged into that a little bit. A lot of the conversations around that we have with our leaders, whether they're emerging, aspiring, highly experienced system leaders, at all levels, is about what you do. Can you do this better? It's about what, and like the literature is abounding on that. So there's some fantastic stuff. I don't want to speak into that, but actually, and again, not my words, people remember who you are rather than what you did. They remember how you made them feel. So so it's not a big stretch to say that we lead who we are. um it's a deeply personal thing, leading who you are. And people go, well, that's not, this is my job. It's not deeply personal. Yes, it is. We lead who we are. It's how we show up every day. Um, One of the things that I want to say about that strength and gentleness, it's a continuum. They're not opposites. They're on the same continuum. And there's a beautiful, I think I'd be fair again to say, a motto of the Brigidine sisters, and it goes something like, "Nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing is so gentle as strength." And strength allows us to hold firm to our convictions, to make those courageous calls. But the gentleness reminds us that people, including ourselves, are human, vulnerable, and deeply, deeply worthy. And just because they're a human being. And so holding those two things in balance. So how do you do that in a day-to-day? That's, we all go, that sounds lovely, Leanne, but what does that look like when I've got a to-do list longer than both my arms put together? One of the things that I am learning to do, I was going to say I've learned to do, but I am learning to do, is I actively choose peace and serenity and calmness. Now, that's sometimes a minute by minute choice. It's sometimes, oh, it's not a choice, it's a choice and then an action followed by it. So that my center is calm and peaceful. Whatever is going on around me, I'm there, but my center is calm. So choosing that, especially when the world around you seems noisy. I think also setting boundaries with is the kindest thing you can do to yourself, but for others as well. Um, Saying no, the word no isn't pushback always. The word no is actually about learning how to be in relationship with one another or even your work. So setting boundaries without losing the kindness. Um, Saying no to what depletes us, saying no to what depletes us and yes to what truly matters. And I think then that's a conscious choice. How do we know that? It's being connected to our mind, body, heart, and spirit. I love how Ken Robinson talks about in education that Sir Ken Robinson talks about in education, that as we go higher up in our education, we educate us, the human being, more and more until we get to the neck up. And you know, let's get back into our bodies and let's connect with our emotions. And it's not in a segmented way; it's in a holistic way, because there's wisdom in all of those parts. But when we try and segment them, it's like trying to get all the cogs to move separately, whereas if you put them together, they'll work more harmoniously and more smoothly. So I think that's that daily act of integration, bringing who I am to what I do. And the fourth thing is being connected to, and well, first of all, knowing. Now, here's a really big one of life's big questions: having a really good sense of, well, what am I here for? What's my purpose in life? Not just what am I here in this school for, but what's my purpose in life? What do I believe that I was put on this earth to do? For me, I know deep within my gut, I know with every bone in my body, I know in my heart, and I know in my head that my life's purpose is to make a difference. And I've felt that since I was a child. And there's a lovely story in the book about that. Um, and my mission in life is as simple as it's to give that purpose away, to make a difference to others in service so that they can make a difference to others. Anne Marie, point in question. That's a nice. So whether I'm teaching or leading or being a mum or a wife, whether I'm coaching, whether I'm writing, whether I'm talking to you, that's the thread that holds it all together. I want to make a difference. Um, and so that strength, and I'm really passionate. There's a strength in that passion, let me tell you. There's fire in my belly about it. So there's the strength in it. And then the gentleness about this is about people. It's deeply, deeply personal.
I agree. There's something about boundaries that allows you to. Brene Brown says it this way, that when you set boundaries, you act within your integrity, so then you can behave with more generosity.
That,
And you said several things I want to reflect on before I ask the next question, which is that strength and that fierceness of leadership. I think of it like a Venn diagram. So there's one circle, and that
mm-hmm.
gentleness and compassion is that other circle. And you
Mm,
put those together, and somewhere in the middle there is what makes a good leader or a good educator or really a good person, because you said humanity is complex. You've also said that not only do you choose equanimity, but then you choose to act on it, and that boundary setting is a kindness, even though it requires fierceness to know how to say no. It also allows you, therefore, to say yes to the things that don't deplete you constantly in this work, but fill you as well.
that's
Um,
right.
and that leads to my next question, which I know I'm asking an experienced leader this question, Leanne. So this is nothing, not only is this what you've studied through research, but you have lived this. So today's education leaders feel that pull constantly between compliance and crisis management. So
100%.
what advice do you have for maintaining that accountability while also staying plugged into that nurturing culture and that human flourishing?
Mm. So I write about that a lot. That's actually probably the whole tenor, in a way, of my book. I don't talk about what I don't lean into is all the requirements of things like the accountability, because there's plenty of books about that. That's not my space, and there's plenty of other people who it is their space, and we can learn from their great knowledge and skill there. I write about remembering and holding that in balance. And you're right. Thank you for saying I'm an experienced leader, but you know what? That doesn't always make it easier. Um, I've got a few more tools in my toolbox, but every context I go into, I don't know which tools I'm going to need to pull out. And I don't always know which ones they're going to work, because people are different, communities are different, schools are different. And yeah, so yes, you acquire some skills and knowledge, but I think this one is about remembering the practice of gathering ourselves and our work into coherence. And what that is deep knowledge of our mission, our vision, purpose, beliefs, and values. All those things that I'm not talking about the mission statement on the wall. I'm not talking about the vision statement on the wall. I'm talking about, first of all, be connected with your own. What do you think your mission in life is? I've told you what mine is. You know, that I don't know that it pops into your head one day. It requires a little bit of work. So there's one way, I think, of being very, very clear about what's my mission, what's my vision for myself, first of all, and not just, well, I want to be a really great principal and in 5 years' time go to the next level. I mean, that is a vision. That's fine, but actually, it's more of a measure, to be honest. What's your vision for yourself? And how does that align with what really sits in your body and your mind and spirit, all of that, your purpose, your beliefs, that notion. Will, we haven't talked about it, but a lot of people would be familiar with the Japanese notion of ikagi, yeah, which I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, because I usually just read it, ikigai.
You pronounced it better than I could.
Okay. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So to me, I've actually done an adaptation of that in my book, um, because which I've got out. What's your personal mission at the center? So it's a remembering about your passion. Where you're like, what's your passion? What really lights the fire in your belly? And if it's basketball, it's basketball. If it's teaching and learning, it's teaching and learning. But whatever it is, be bold about it. Be loud and bold about it. It's about that coherence and alignment of ourself. And what I'm going to say, and we talked about the word no, anything that is not in that alignment, it's okay to say no. It creates the space for what really matters. And the third thing is about vision. Having your vision is almost like a compass that helps you discern what gives attention, what gets your attention, what's taking you in the direction that you really believe you want to go. Now, that's an individual thing. Ken Wilber, whose work I really like, Ken Wilber, I don't know if you know Ken, he, I think I'm correct in saying he was a philosopher, or is a philosopher. Anyway, he was looking at all these theories of, why we're here and human development and all of that. And he said, you know what? There's got to be some sort of connectivity here. There's got to be some point of alignment where all of these things come in together. So he's written a book called The Theory of Everything. Which he locked himself away, and he came up with something in that. And I think he's got this model of 4 quadrants, the top 2 quadrants being the individual, and the bottom 2 quadrants being the community, in our case, the school, it could be the family, whatever. That's what that looks like if you cut it horizontally. When you cut it vertically, on the left is the inner world. So if you like, we all know the iceberg metaphor of what's above the iceberg, and then all of the things that actually drive us, which are below the iceberg. So it talks about that's what's on the left-hand side, both as an individual but as a community. Now, let me just say, we know that it's this inner world that makes the decisions. We think it's not. We think it's our conscious mind, but it's our unconscious mind who's driving all of those big decisions, our beliefs, all of that. But where do we as a community actually connect and say, well, this is what I think accountability means here. This is what I think our vision statement means here. But what do you think, Will? Because, you know, the picture you have in your head might be really different to mine. But if we're going to work together, somewhere we've got to get the picture together, not just by reading the words, because we're all going to create our own reality. And then on the right-hand side are the outer expressions. So for me, that's a really important part of that accountability, is getting the inner worlds right, so that the outer expression is in integrity, an expression of integrity of what is deeply important.
What I appreciate about this so much is I think for so long, when you sit in the complexities of any kind of situation, um, you often feel this pressure to choose a response. You know, one way I'm going to respond to this situation, or a lot of times people are looking for the solution for whatever it is that they're facing in the complexities of this work. And there's just something really helpful, I think, when you look at both sides of the same coin.
Yeah,
And so when you're describing Ken Wilber's theory of everything, where you've got the individual and the community in your lens, but you recognize that both the inner world and the outer expression are both pressures happening at the same time, but one always affects the other.
that's right.
It's also helpful for me to come back to something you said earlier too, when you talk about mission and vision and beliefs and values. I call it the story you tell yourself every day when you walk into school.
Mm,
You know, what is that story? Because if that story is today, I'm going to
mhm.
walk in and there will be no problems, there's going to be peace, there's going to be no conflicts, I'm going to just I'll be able to check everything off my to do list. If that's the mindset, you're going to be really frustrated unless you have a day with no
Yeah,
people around.
I'm
Um,
just, well, during the school holidays is a really good time to walk in with that.
yes, yes,
Thing.
it is a good time for
But you
those
know, it doesn't always work in the
expectations.
school holidays either.
Yeah, but if the narrative you're telling yourself, and you touched on this earlier, is I know what I believe and what I've been created for to make a difference. And today, whatever happens, that's my purpose, is to redeem this moment or repair this thing that's broken or make this a better situation. Then that tension between compliance and reports and all those things that you have to do can happen while at the same time I'm responding to the people in front of me in ways that's caring and hopefully cooperative and patient, not perfectly, but at least I have that mindset. Um,
Mm,
I, you also spend some some parts of your book talking about um, the science like psychology, but also contemplative practice. And so
yeah,
you use the word remembering. I like to use the word reflection. But
yeah.
just can you talk a little bit about what are some of the insights or practice that have been most transformative for you
Mm,
as you try to refocus and remember,
mm,
so that you can keep moving forward with that perspective?
yeah. Thank you. That's a really good question. Well, as you said in the introduction, a lot of my work is in Catholic education. A lot of my experience has been in Catholic education, the vast majority, but not quite all. Now, so our religion, as all religions do, they all have some uh, contemplative practices that are part of that tradition. So I lean into those in terms of what are the practices. So what does that look like? That looks like being part of a parish community, like outside of my school. So being connected, it looks like daily prayer. It looks like, some of the practices that are reflective of the tradition. Um, I'm, I can't even think of any, but I mean, I actually went to a book launch last night in our parish. Incidentally, this is a little sidebar. I'll give you the heads up. My parish that I grew up in, and I now live again in, is serviced very beautifully and has been done for many years by the Augustinian fathers, and our Pope is an Augustinian. And our Pope has been to Australia many, many times. And so one of the priests wrote a book which is on the history of the current Pope's experiences in Australia. So it was a book launch. So that was sort of fun. But attending things like that is really good for me. It's connecting with those people of my faith. That's a contemplative, reflective practice, because even those little conversations, even the connection with the people. So sometimes the reflection can be connection. So
I'm
there,
glad you said that.
yeah.
I want to add one thought to that too, which is because you lead in a Catholic setting, and I've come from a Protestant background, but both, I think the things that I've appreciated so much about both of those traditions, and whether people see this or not, I think your tradition actually names it better than mine, which are what are the liturgies that we embrace regularly
Yeah.
that keep us connected to those things
Mm,
that are the most meaningful. And
that's
so
right.
you mentioned some of those being a part of your community, the
Yes.
practices that you have in worship or prayer, but also um, when I think about those um, for me, those reflective practices, for you, those contemplative practices, um, it and I know I'm speaking to leaders right now who may or may not resonate with what I'm saying or what you're saying, but I think they are, because the leaders who I seem to see do this work sustainably and hold on to their meaning have reflect a lot of reflective practice where they
Mm,
take time to really think deeply about what am I experiencing, how have I been managing my experience, what do I need to recenter in this experience. And I think without that, Leanne, it's really easy to just go through the motions, or it's really easy for work just to become a job. And
yes.
so anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I want to also just sort of lean into the fact that I use a lot of contemplative practices outside of my faith tradition as well. So
Mhm.
in my book, I actually have a section which I've come up with. It's a sea of contemplative practices, which I've grouped
Mhm.
in things. So there's those practices of just being silent and still, as a Christian. Um, but, the same with most religions, certainly the Eastern ones, being silent and stilling what, our psychologists call our monkey mind, but stilling all the noise, taking some time. So, sometimes I will do a 20-minute silent meditation. Of late, because I've had a bit of leave at the moment, I take my dogs for a walk. I'm very, very fortunate. I live on about a block from our beautiful Sydney Harbour. And so the beautiful walkways that we have to just take in creation. But that's a very contemplative that experience in nature. It's also, we've got fabulous beaches. It's another walk, which is, these are all just part of my environment. I think I also think there's physical things, not just that. So yoga I find really helpful, and I find that while people might be a little critical about the alignment between sort of Christianity and some of the spirituality of yoga, I think that I just replace what they're saying with my notion of who my God is in my mind. But I find that getting back into your body and really listening deeply to the wisdom that is in your body in a very contemplative yoga practice is really helpful. Service to others, getting outside, getting off yourself. Now, that's a bit tricky, and I am going to just say that with a little bit of a warning, because that's what our leaders do every day they get up and walk into their school. They're there to serve. And I think where we touched earlier on, we didn't use the expression compassion fatigue, but I think it's also this sense of, where do you see, it's service not just because you feel good, but it's a service of in relationship. That if you're there working with homeless people, for example, that you're actually getting as much from them as they are from you. It's not a one way. It's this very sense of mutuality. So those sorts of contemplative practices, some of them, they're not all just
Mhm.
cross-legged with my eyes closed. Some are. Not always going to church. They're not always sitting with my hands joined. Sometimes they're much more active. The creative,
Yeah.
singing.
So for some people, that's fishing. For some people, that's
Oh,
walking. For some people, that's hunting. For some
100%.
people, that's walking
Yes.
your dog. I love that. In fact, Leanne, a couple of weeks before this recording, I was in upstate New York with my wife, and we did some hiking there. And there was a brochure in the hotel where we were staying, and I love nature, but I had never read this before. But the brochure mentioned that trees actually release a chemical called fin, fenton seeds, Fytoncides. I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it's a chemical released by microbial chemicals released by trees that make you feel better. And so, who would have ever thought that stepping outside and looking at the clouds or walking in trees or you mentioned just the a commitment to silence. And I want to just say this to principal managers listeners right now, because you're probably listening and thinking, well, good for you, Leanne and Will, that you guys have time for contemplative practices. But I just want to say this, that um, stepping away from your desk and walking outside long enough to see the clouds and circle the building back in to connect with kids is a reflective practice.
Yes, it is.
Walking into a room where children are singing and just letting their sounds wash over you is a reflective practice.
Yes.
Sitting down and just writing down a quick 4 or 5 grateful things that you saw happen that day is a reflective practice. So there's not just one way to do this.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to do this.
There are, and Anne Marie. I don't want to, give away her story, but she talks about what she does, and she literally says, even if it means going to the bathroom. Like even if
Yes.
it means like and what she's talking about is having that moment, and particularly she in the context she's talking about is that if she knows she's got a bit of a meeting she's a bit worried about or it's a bit challenging, she always makes sure she takes a little bit of a sign, and she works in a Catholic school, so she goes, she actually offers that up in prayer and says, I'm a bit worried about this, God, please, this is she connects back with her purpose. This is the purpose. This is, help me get through this with respect and in alignment. So, and she
Yeah.
talks about that she might even go out into the playground, but she literally says, or even if I have to go to the bathroom, which I can
Mhm.
relate to that too, because I've used the bathroom too to reset my state, if you like. If you can feel, it's very easy in the hyperactivity of the school where there's so much going on to get caught up in that, and then to go and reset that. I do use literally the bathroom to do that, to actually change my state. And that's the sort of thing that sort of when I've learned in my coaching, in my master coaching course, we learn a lot about that. Actually, if we can put it into our physiology, it's our physiology that informs our psychology, not the other way around. And we know that because when we're calm, that whole parasympathetic, all of those good neurotransmitters, those helpful ones are pumping through our system when we're all hyped up. Yes, we've got neurotransmitters, but they're not always the helpful ones for helping us tap into to choosing that peace and choosing serenity, because we're choosing this fight or flight stuff. So yeah, that was quite a long
I love
answer.
that.
Thank you. That was
Well,
great.
I'm smiling because I'm remembering back when I was an assistant principal. I worked with a head principal who, when we had evening activities and we were going to have to stay really late, sometimes she would just say, "Hey, I'll see you at that activity here in about an hour, but I'm going to go rest." And she would go to the nurse's office where there was a bed there for kids when they came in, and she would just lay down and nap, and before that next thing. And so sometimes whatever that is,
Mm.
there's so many practices you've already named, Leanne, but as I'm preparing to wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you if there's a leader listening today who wants to develop this fierce heart that you talk about. What is what's something you want them to hold on to, a step that they might can take even today towards that end?
So I've got two things, and one's sort of a thought, and the other is very, very practical. So my thought is, start by pausing long enough to reconnect with your passion and your purpose. That sense of burnout and overwhelm. Like, what do you love? What do you love? Like, let's get back to that. What is it that you love? So many leaders they forget why they started this whole journey. So reconnecting with that there's the sort of global thing, but I think it's very important. And if your passion is fishing, reconnect with it. Reconnect with it in some way, even if it means ringing somebody and just saying, I'm flat out for the next 2 weeks, but let's make a fishing agenda, or appointment, or whatever one does with fishing. Not my bag, that one. And your purpose, why am I here? Am I in alignment? So just sort of, you've got to be able to name and see these things before you can actually do anything about them. So just pausing long enough to name them. But my very practical one, and again, this is in my book, but I have then a more fulsome tool. But coaches use a tool called the Wheel of Life. So capital W, Wheel of Life, capital L. You can Google it. It is freely available. Just the heads up, please don't pay a coach to do a Wheel of Life with you. It's on Google. You can do it almost as well yourself, I'm sure equally as well. But it's a good place to start. Download it. It's a reflective tool that gets you to look at not just your professional life, but your health, your career, finances, relationships, your environment, all of that, whatever. And take about 10 minutes and honestly assess where you are. Not to judge, just to notice, that whole noticing. So that's not a very long task to do, Wheel of Life. From there, you can then choose an area. Generally, the suggestion is don't always choose the one that you're really bad at, that you're going, I'm not doing very well at all. Those areas all integrate with one another, but choose something and you go, I think I'd like to scale that up a bit. And then just set yourself a goal. Set yourself to do one thing that's different. James Clear in his Atomic Habits talks about, just form a new habit, because it might be just as simple as, and it doesn't have to be a big one. It could be finding that, whether it's your 20-minute meditation, whether it's, okay, I'm going to go fishing once every fortnight, whatever it is, and stick to it, because the research says it takes an average of 66 continuous days to create a new habit, but can take up to 200 and something. Sometimes it's as fast as 16 days, but just start and commit to it. It's not about speed, it's about steadiness, and then just pick it and do it. So that's a really practical thing. Do the Wheel of Life, find an area, make a commitment, and take the action.
That's so
And
practical, Leanne.
yeah, the one in the book
I'm gonna
is it does have the Wheel of Life, but it will also have a sort of one that feeds into, I guess, the beliefs of that sit underneath a fierce-hearted leader, and it actually gets an audit of that sort. So that's a little plug for finding something a little bit different.
Well, that is so practical. The time that we're recording this is before the release of this new book, but
Yes.
hopefully by the time this releases, Principal Matters listeners, you can look for the book, The Fierce Hearted Leader: Living, Learning, and Leading from Love, with Leanne Nicol. Leanne, as we wrap up, how can leaders stay connected with you, and any closing thoughts or words?
Sure. Okay. I think so. First of all, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I post there fairly regularly. I also like to share things that I also see from other people. Part of that advocacy and support for leaders is that if you're posting something or doing something great, I believe in sharing it across my community and spreading that news widely. I guess so. That's on LinkedIn. So just under Leanne Nicol, and Nicol is Nicol. So please connect with me. Also tell me you heard me on the podcast. That'd be fun to be able to
Yeah.
see thanks. Also, I guess the one thing I want you to take from the conversation is that being a leader doesn't have to cost you your joy or your sense of self or your family. Um, it's really, the fierce-hearted leader is really an invitation. It's not a recipe and it's not a directive, but it's an invitation to live, learn, and lead from love, and to return to yourself. Because when we do that, we're stronger, we're wiser, we're happier, we're healthier. We create stronger schools and stronger communities where others feel seen, valued, and inspired. So they're my parting words for the day.
Well, Leanne, Nicol, what a privilege and an honor to get to meet you and to introduce you to Principal Matters listeners. And Principal Matters listeners, I know you are committed to being fierce-hearted leaders yourself, but we're going to put a link to the book and a link to Nicole's LinkedIn profile so that you can find her there as well. But Leanne, thank you so much for your leadership, and Principal Matters listeners, thank you for learning together today. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters.
Thank you so much, Will. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.